And our fourth main topic today gets submitted to us by Raymond Ray Reddington, who writes, Black Widow had a huge domestic release in theaters, and it was bigger worldwide, but the drop-off is as huge as F9's second week. But is Disney facing a bigger problem with piracy from Premier Access offerings, ultra-clean copies for people who screen record, and curb sales as new markets receive the film in theaters? Case in point, piracy sites are offering Black Widow downloads with Chinese subtitles. As Aaron Cummings would say, just saying, have a great day. All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, man. And yes, obviously, we were just talking about Space Jam came in at number one this weekend in its opening weekend, making $31.6 million. But what is really interesting is that Black Widow made, I think, 29 something million, somewhere in that neighborhood. The thing is, Black Widow came in second place in its second weekend, taking the largest drop in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Week 2 history. No movie in the MCU has ever dropped as much as Black Widow just did in its second weekend. Now, there's a couple of really interesting articles from Deadline here that want to go into this. And so there's a couple of questions. The main one, of course, being, Rob, is why? Because it's not like this was a badly reviewed movie. This is a very positively reviewed movie. And more importantly, the audience scores have been even higher than the critic scores have been. So you have a movie that is extremely well received by the audience and the critics. It had a decent opening weekend, very strong, especially in the post-COVID era. So why would this overwhelmingly positively reviewed and positively received movie take such a massive dip? Let's go over to Deadline for a minute and read a little bit in length, because I thought they made some really, really great points here. Let's start with this. And I'll see if I can get this to be a little bit bigger for you guys watching at home so you can get a little bit better of an idea of what's being written here. It says, if Disney keeps this up, the whole theatrical/PVOD day and date release model, maybe it won't be so scary for rival studios in the future to follow a Marvel movie in its second weekend at the box office. The studio's Marvel Cinematic Universe standalone original movie, Black Widow, had a great fall in its second session at the domestic box office, down a whopping 67%. Now, to put that into perspective, that is 5 full percent lower than the second biggest drop-off in Marvel Cinematic box office history, which was Ant-Man 2, which I thought was really good. But Ant-Man 2 took a 62% drop. This thing passed that by a full 5%. Anyway, a 67% drop with $26.25 million at the second weekend box office. Black Widow lost the number one spot to Warner Brothers' day and date release theatrical HBO Max release Space Jam: A New Legacy, which opened at 31.65. If you want to know what the negative impact is by having a Marvel movie available in homes and in the theaters at the same time, well, here it is. That's the steepest second weekend box office ever for a Disney distributed MCU title, beating Ant-Man 2 and the Wasp, which came in at 62%. There's a couple of interesting things to note here that were brought up in another article by Deadline, because jumping all over this was NATO, the North American Theater Owners Association. This is the organization that runs all the movie theaters in the world. And you knew they were getting ready to jump all over this failure, because they came out swinging. They came out swinging hard. All right. This comes to us from the folks over at Variety, who wrote, sorry, wrong one. This is the one that came to us from over at Deadline, is that they're talking about NATO. And they're saying, listen, if you want to talk about what went wrong, and you want to talk about why this is the biggest collapse and biggest second weekend failure that Marvel's ever had, especially considering that this thing was a big success with the audience and the critics and stuff like that, all you got to do is look at this stupid, idiotic Disney Premier Access thing. That's all you got to do, according to them. Let's take a look at some of the things that they had to say. In a press release dropped this afternoon, following our analysis of what went sideways with the Marvel Cinematic Universe title, NATO, again, that's the North American Theater Owners, or they've changed it to now National Association of Theater Owners is what it's called now, I believe. Asks, how can a well-reviewed, well-received, highly anticipated Marvel title underperform, leading to a first weekend Friday to Saturday collapse of 41% and a 67% drop in weekend 2? NATO comes to the same conclusions as we at Deadline did in regards to Black Widow getting her legs picked off. Piracy and Disney Plus at-home cannibalization, which impacts not just the box office, but the movie's subsequent home window release as well. And that is interesting that they brought that part up, because that's a part that we don't often discuss, right? Hold on a second, let me just bring this up here. That's a part of it we don't often discuss, is how this affected home video. Okay, let's go over to the Campea classroom just for a quick second here, okay? What went wrong with Black Widow? Well, first of all, there's an obvious problem here, right? Piracy. Piracy was going to be a problem. Now people can get high quality screen captures right off their TV and share it. Is that a problem? Absolutely, it's a problem. Home viewing. There's a couple of problems with home viewing, and that is this. When a movie has a full theatrical release, people can go see the movie multiple times if they liked it, and the box office benefits, right? So if let's say Black Widow just had a theatrical release, people can go watch it at the movies, they make money. And then if somebody really liked it, then what happens is they go back again and they bring other people. And now you're getting repeat viewings and things like that. That adds to the box office total as well. However, with this model, there is no multiple box office, because if somebody bought it for $30 at home, they can now watch it 12 times and Disney's getting no benefit from that. So that's that. But the one that we've never really talked about is PVOD. Rob, what we often talk about is that by Disney putting this thing on Premier Access at home, they're cannibalizing the box office money they could be making. But what we haven't really also considered, that the theater owners have just brought up a very valid point. Not only are they cannibalizing their box office money, they're also cannibalizing a very lucrative after box office VOD sales business, right? Because what would happen is, a movie comes out on PVOD like 3 months later and makes money, right? Everybody gets excited. They remember seeing Black Widow in the theaters. It's been a couple of months. They're all excited. And what happens? They put it on premium video on demand, where you can either through iTunes or through Apple or Google Play or some other service, you can buy the movie or rent the movie, blah, blah, and you're making all this money on this PVOD sales. What we haven't really considered before, and I can't believe we haven't, is that they have just totally cannibalized that very lucrative market. They've totally cannibalized it. And so that's been taken away as well. And if you want to get a sense for how badly did Black Widow do on its second weekend with premium access rentals, it went through the floor. It went through the floor. And the theater owners are quick to point this out. They said, the one time, Disney never once announced how much money on a premium purchase that Mulan made, because it was terrible. I never heard the exact numbers, but I heard it was terrible. So Disney never talked about it. Disney never talked about their home video premium purchases that they got for Cruella. Well, because we heard it was terrible. It was miserable. They did it 3 times. It was terrible. The only time they ever brought it up was when Black Widow generated 2 million sales. And they were really proud of that. But they're not mentioning at all anything about their second weekend sales. They're not mentioning that at all. They're just saying, zip, shh, don't talk about that, because they fell through the floor as well. So NATO and Deadline are basically, and Variety as well has gotten in on this as well, as they're all pointing to, this is a basic failure of the model. It is a basic failure of their premium access model. that is going to lead to this thing making far less money than it probably could have. Now, Rob, you and I were talking on the phone last night, and I brought this up too, and I think you agree. I think there is also another non-premium access issue that contributed to Black Widow having such a big second weekend release drop. And I said this with Fast 9 as well. And that is this. I think while we are in this recovery phase, which, by the way, our recovery phase is being paused because people won't get vaccinated. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to you, we can't have nice things. Anyway, but while we're in this kind of phase of recovery, I think people who want to go to a movie are really going out the first weekend. And that's that. I think you're getting a higher percentage of the people who are interested in going to the theaters. They're going to go opening weekend. And I think we're seeing that reflect a little bit. But I also, while I believe that is true, I also believe, I've always thought that this premium model that Disney is doing was ass backwards. And as of right now, Variety is saying that they have heard from their insider sources that Disney has no intention of moving any of the rest of the films for this year to the premium model. I mean, obviously we've got Jungle Cruise coming out. That's already planned. That's already announced. But a lot of us have been wondering if they were going to start adding more films to that list. Variety is now saying that Disney right now is planning not to move any other films to the premium model list. Rob, I know you read through the Deadline article. It's pretty extensive.
Yeah.
They go into a lot of details on a lot of different things there. And there's a lot to unpack here. For Fast 9, we understood because generally speaking, I mean, some people at home may have really liked it, and that's awesome. You and I thought Fast 9 was terrible. A lot of people thought it was terrible. So, you kind of get the big drop. Black Widow was well reviewed and very well received by the audience, and it still took this dip. You read the various opinions. You and I have talked about it as well. What is your take on this drop? What caused it, and what do you think the ramifications of it are going to be?
Well, I think there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking here going on, but I have a theory in that one of the things that people aren't discussing is that the perception of the Marvel Cinematic Universe amongst audiences has also changed in the sense that we had 23 movies, Spider-Man Far From Home obviously being the end. There was something that was being built, constructed, that every part was leading up to this amazing climax, and then Spider-Man Far From Home was sort of the breather that we needed. So you have these 23 movies carefully built over, almost a decade. This movie is unnecessary as far as understanding. I mean, in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the only thing that matters in this movie is the introduction of Florence Pugh, as far as what we've come to love about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that it's this ongoing, developing storyline. And at the same time, we've also had 3 shows, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and now Loki, that have also been expanding this mythology out into various different ways that have not been the same as what we've been getting for the last 10 years. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe itself is undergoing an evolutionary period that we don't quite yet understand. Because like when it first began, it's almost in reset mode. And yet, the 3 shows have not broken through like this way Iron Man 1 did. I mean, Iron Man 1, with the founding cornerstone of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was very exciting. It was a movie that kind of came out of nowhere. They didn't know how well it was going to do. It did extraordinarily well. It made almost $500 million worldwide, and that was right out of the gate. Now, while we've all loved, I've really enjoyed the different Marvel Cinematic Universe offerings since the beginning of the year. They don't have the kind of mass appeal that even a movie like Iron Man 1 had. And then this first movie, Black Widow, is fun to watch for us, but basically it's kind of inconsequential other than introducing Florence Pugh. So I don't think that it has necessarily the wide audience appeal just because it's a Marvel movie, because it's not offering us anything new. I think this is going to go down in history as being anomalous. I'm really curious to see what Shang-Chi does because it is new. It's the introduction of a character that we don't know. It's a character that's going to move forward in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, Black Widow's dead. I mean, she's gone. Maybe they'll bring her back. But really, did anybody really need to see this movie? You certainly didn't need it to understand what's happening in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, you will when Hawkeye rolls around and Florence Pugh is introduced there again. And I loved the relationship in Black Widow between Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh. But I'm dubious as to whether the entire movie-going audience, even people that love the MCU, needed to see this movie.
See, the reason I don't agree with that assessment is because I think if that was true, we would have seen that reflected in its opening weekend. But its opening weekend for our post-pandemic era showed a lot of people were interested in Black Widow. And so I just think if what you're saying was the case, that people don't really see it as a necessary film to the MCU and all, then they wouldn't have gone in the first. Then we wouldn't have seen a strong opening weekend. I don't.
Well, the fans go. You know, the opening weekend. I think anybody is going to go to a movie like this. I mean, because you want to see. So all of us fans go to that first weekend. But the thing is, it's everybody else. You know, you've got to get everybody else. Marvel movies have a lot of families will go later, and word of mouth is always really important on these things. Like I would have thought Black Widow, especially the sisterhood, the sisterly relations that Black Widow and Yelena Belova have, was really good. I would have thought more mothers and daughters would have gone to see this movie more in the second and third weekend, like we would have seen Captain Marvel. But you know, Captain Marvel was positioned between Infinity War and Endgame, and it's like, nope, you got to see. You're going to understand her participation in Endgame. So there was an urgency to get out and see that this movie doesn't have.
But see, I disagree with that because, like, you just made the point yourself that I believe, how does this tie into the overall MCU means less to the more casual viewers. I think the more casual viewers, which, you know, are the big thing here, like, how does this movie specifically tie into these other four? That means less to them than it does to, like, say, people like us. And she's a very, very popular character amongst them. I don't think that's, I can't be convinced that's a part of it.
But I also do. I think right now also we're in a bit of a backlash against Marvel. You know, the Marvel shows have not been as decisively hits amongst viewers. There's a lot of divisiveness amongst the fan base as to whether WandaVision, Falcon, the Winter Soldier, and Loki worked as well as we'd hoped. And I also think that they're not nearly as focused. I mean, they've gone off in these really strange directions. WandaVision, for as much as I thought it was audacious and really interesting, it's not exactly this kind of superhero fare people are used to. Certainly not in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I thought it was really audacious what it did. Loki went full comic book. You know, and if superheroes are one thing, but Loki was really pushing the boundaries of fantasy and science fiction and multiversal craziness, and not nearly as accessible as the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been. And I'm just wondering if all of that kind of collectively comes together to make people sort of like, I'm not as satisfied by this entertainment as I have been, or something. I don't know. I mean, I think we're going to be studying this for a long time to come.
So, guys, the question is, what do you think? I mean, personally, I think you can write this thing off to the faulty premium access thing, the fact that there are much higher quality piracy copies that are now available, the fact that you're not getting repeat viewings because, Rob, with a traditional MCU film, people go weekend one and then they go again weekend two. You're not getting that now because somebody who gets it at home can just keep staying at home because they can just keep watching at home. So there's none of that repeat viewership, all that kind of stuff. Rob brings up a different point of view, that maybe people just perceive Black Widow as an unnecessary film to watch, that maybe there's a bit of a backlash or a fatigue growing with the MCU in and of itself. What do you guys think is at the core problem here with the biggest drop-off ever in a second weekend with a Marvel Cinematic Universe? What are your guys' thoughts? Jump down into the comment section below and leave your thoughts there.